Hi everyone. I want to talk to you about somatic movement practice in impractical places. So we went to a music festival called Camper Calling. It was brilliant. If you live in the UK, highly recommend it. Fantastic for families, great music. It was really friendly and accessible. So we were camping and then going to, the music festival, all the other events that were on during the days and right into the night. And we had a fantastic time, but was it easy to get my somatic movement practice in? No, it wasn't. So it really got me thinking, what can I share with you about somatic movement practice when you're not in the ideal space, right? Normally, maybe we're at home, we put out our yoga mat, or we're on a rug or something like that. We've got a little bit of space around us. We're usually inside, right? Because if you're lying outside, you've got the sun shining down or the rain's falling or whatever it might be. It doesn't really help us pay attention to our internal sensations, right? When you're camping, or even if you're on holiday but sort of not in your usual space, we don't always have the same options, right? And actually, just as a little aside, some of us don't have loads of space at home either. So some of these ideas might help you with your practice at home, right? Now, we did take a yoga mat with us, thinking, we might have some time and space to kind of lay out the mat and get some proper practice in. Did we use it? No, we didn't. There wasn't really the sort of physical space that worked. We never really had a big chunk of time because we were always kind of getting ready or eating or, something like that. And there wasn't a lot of peace and quiet in the campsite sort of during the day. And we were out in the evening, obviously listening to the music. So it really made me get a bit more flexible with my practice. And I wanted to share with you some ways that I did that. So first of all, if we're thinking about the problem of lack of time, you would think that on holiday you'd just have loads of time and you would be choosing what you want to do and you would get your practice in easily. And every time I go on holiday I think that is going to be the case, and I take books and I take my crochet and all of these things. Rarely do I actually get too much of that, right? And it always takes me by surprise. So holidays do not give you more time to do practice. So we have to think, if we don't want to kind of do no practice at all whilst we're away, how can we do that? I know from my own experience that if I, stop doing my practice for a long weekend or a week or whatever, I stiffen up, I stop moving as freely, I start falling back into my sort of old patterns of posture or movement that are not the ones that help me the most, right? So when I'm away and I don't manage to find lots of time, and I think this is particularly but not only the case if you have kids and you're trying to sort of work around family stuff, right? In those moments, I grab the little bits of time that I can and I do micro practices. So for example, when I first wake up in the morning, I'm still in bed, I will give myself a full body pandiculation, whatever that kind of looks like for me, right? Or I finish eating and I go to get up and I think, I feel like I've stiffened up a little bit. Again, full body pandiculation. Or maybe there's sort of an area that I think, I just want to get into that. So I might get a little bit more specific, right? But fairly quick. Maybe it's after, doing some washing up or setting up the beds or putting up the awning, that sort of thing. Maybe I've been sort of hunched over, bent over a bit. I might grab just a few moments to do a very quick practice, just to reset the resting level of tension of the muscles, right? You can do an awful lot by bringing in pandiculations in those sort of moments. You won't be peeling back the deeper layers. You won't be addressing the kind of nuance of your muscle holding. but you'll keep things at bay, right? A little bit like a sort of maintenance practice. You're kind of treading water with the work, and it will do for this period of time, right? Until you get back home and you can get into things a little bit more deeply, right? So yeah, and as I was saying, if I feel like a little bit of tightness in some very specific area of my soma, then what I can do is go into that once or twice in whatever position I happen to be in. Does that feel a bit less tight? Maybe I'll then sort of move that area through its range of motion. Maybe it's shoulders, for example. I might bring in my, went totally blank then, bring in my flower arms to get the shoulders sort of moving, right? Not necessarily as a pandiculation, but just to kind of say, hey, shoulders, remember, this is how you can move, right? Keeping my awareness on my internal sensations, noticing what else might show up as I do that, right? What can I pandiculate? What can I release? Really quick and simple. So when we haven't got a lot of time, micro practices, full body pandiculations, or more targeted pandiculations and movement, right? So another problem is, of course, lack of space. If we are on holiday, something like camping, like laying out a yoga mat, where are you going to do that, right? So it might be impossible to do that sort of thing. So we've got a few options. One is do our practice lying in bed. One is do our practice in a seated position. And one is do our practice in standing. They all have their sort of benefits, their uses, right? So lying in bed is great because when you've finished a movement, you can fully let go and you can rest and you can integrate between repetitions, right? It also feels lovely when you've just woken up, like I said before, full body pandiculation in bed, fantastic. Also, just before you go to sleep. And we know that releasing muscle tension before we sleep can help us to sleep. So that's really helpful. The downside of being on anything other than a sort of very firm surface, like if your bed when you're camping is a mat on the floor, this might work for you, right? Because you're not really in bed, you're on a very firm surface, right? But anything else is going to alter your resting position because you're going to kind of sag right into the mattress or whatever you're on. I don't know, airbed, whatever. It's going to affect your position as you do the movements and like what you're able to move into and what you're able to kind of press against, brace against, right? It's going to affect which muscles you're using, what you sense in your soma. And also there are kind of limits to the position that you can release back to, in the sense that you might not release back to kind of a sort of flat sort of central position. You might be like, as I say, like sagging into the mattress, right? It's not a problem in and of itself, but it is really, really worth being aware of this and how being in those positions, being on that surface changes what is going on as you do your practice. That said, it might also teach you something new, right? You might spot something that you had not noticed in your usual position. So it's well worth giving it a try. And one really great tip for doing some of this work as you're lying on a slightly squashier surface is feel free to alter your position when you're doing some of the movements. So for example, instead of doing your arch and flatten lying on your back, maybe you do it lying on your side, right? Or you could lie on your side to do some flower arms rather than being on your back. So think about how you might adapt your position to get what you want to get out of the movements, right? Okay, so moving on to when you're in seated. This is actually like a really lovely addition to your repertoire anyway. So maybe being away and sort of having to do it in seated might actually be helpful because you might learn something new that you wouldn't have learnt lying on the mat. Usually our choice of position is to lie down because of being able to fully release. So when we have to do the work in seated, that's really going to bring a slightly different dimension to the work. Lots of the movements are adaptable to a seated position. Obviously, you're releasing back to seated where obviously some of the muscles are kind of working to keep you in that position. You're not going to get that full release like you would if you were lying down. So you can have a go. What could you do in seated position? Things like arch and flatten are great. You could do your wash rag arms, right? Get those shoulders moving. Lots of different things that you can do. If you can do it on the edge of a bed, that sort of thing, make sure it's stable so that you can kind of sit up fairly straight. That's great. If you've only got a camping chair, you can certainly try it, but obviously they're not particularly stable, so you might need to sit further back. You might not kind of have your legs in the right angle position, right? Just see what you can do. Work with what's available to you. A bit like we meet ourselves where we're at in somatic movement, we kind of have to meet the environment where it's at as well, right? And go, well, how can I work with this if I can't change it? Okay, so if a seated practice is out for whatever reason, or you just fancy something different, standing might be your last option. There are a few movements that are really well suited to standing, like the shelf reach, right, where we're releasing our sides. Some you just have to ponder, what can I do here, right? What's contracting when I do this? Can I find a way for that to happen so I can release those muscles? Again, you won't be able to release to full rest in standing, but you will still get lots of benefits from doing it this way. Again, that kind of shaking it up, that variety, it's going to teach you something new. And if you think of it in sort of its broadest terms, people who get out of bed in the morning and then do that kind of morning stretch, which is appendiculation, often that would be in standing. It's still going to reset the resting level of tension of the muscles that you're using. It feels really good, so it is definitely worth doing some practice in standing. Okay, so any one of those positions might work better, but they're all going to give you some insights. They're all going to give you some muscle release. So trying different things, shake it up, vary it, give different positions a try at different points in your day, see what works, see what it gives you, right? And then the last problem that I want to talk about is just being out of routine. I don't know about you, but I find things like somatic movement, or even, honestly, cleaning my teeth or brushing my hair, if I'm out of my routine, they do tend to there's more risk of them falling by the wayside, right? We all know, I'm sure we've all heard this before, tying a new habit to an older habit, a more established habit, is a really good way to help you remember the new habit, right? Because it just sort of happens as a logical consequence, if you like, of the established habit. However, when we're away and our established habits get a little wobbly, then of course we can't really tie something to that because the original habit is not even in place, right? So if you can do that, great. But if not, then you're probably going to need to try to, as best you can, try to be more aware of when you feel you need your practice. So and this is pretty great anyway. Like if you're going through your day at home and you go, oh, something feels a bit tight or stiff or sore, can you do your practice for a few minutes in those moments? But particularly when we're out of our regular routine, doing little check-ins and using that as a signal to do our practice. So, for example, maybe you're on holiday and you go for a long walk. Or maybe you're at a music festival and you go and dance to a band for an hour. And then you have a sit down, a little rest, and you go to get up, you think, oh, I've kind of stiffened up a little bit, right? Because the muscles have been working hard. That would be a great time to go, you know what I could do? I could do a minute of somatic movement or half a minute of somatic movement, right? And it might be as simple as that kind of moment where you stand up, you go, oh yeah, I feel a bit stiff. What feels stiff in my soma? Can I contract and release that? Can I bring a little bit of release to those muscles? And then noticing after you've done that, how do I feel different, right? if you have a little bit more time, a little bit more capacity, a little bit more space, you might think to yourself, do you know what? I actually really need a bit more of this. Can I find a few minutes to find somewhere to lie down or do a bit of seated practice or whatever? Maybe you're even super organised and you feel like, actually, I can do like a fuller session. And that might be, maybe you got access to some recordings, or maybe you can work from that starting point of, okay, what do I sense? What do I need? Where shall I start? Figuring out your practice as you go. So obviously, if you're doing those longer practices, it takes a little bit more planning, coordination, maybe with other members of your group. But if you can get in a longer practice, fantastic, right? So hopefully that's given you a few ideas of how to sort of keep things going. I think we can get a little bit sort of focused on, sort of doing a perfect practice. And if we can't do that, then it's not worth it. And that is absolutely not the case. So once you have done some practice in a more structured way, it's much easier to kind of grab a few minutes here and there to do your work. It's much easier to generate your own ideas for what you need in your session. Until then, and before you next go away, we have absolutely tons of resources, some shorter, some longer, all in our membership area, all pre-recorded. There's live classes if you go for that option as well. And you can access those all through the membership. And that is a really, really good way to get started and to build your practice before you end up in those situations where things become a little bit more challenging, right? So I'll see you in there, and have a good time if you are going away. See you in the next video.